Good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUCC, the UU Church of Canandaigua. I'm Eileen, I'm your minister, and I'm so glad to be with you this morning. But before we begin our worship service today, I have just a few quick announcements to share with you. The first is that if you hadn't already figured out how to access it, I want to let you know we have closed captioning on our services. If that would help you to understand them better, probably it'll depend on what kind of device you're using to access Zoom. But if you want to see captions, probably there's a little toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, so long as you're not in full screen, with a little ... more button. If you click that, you can choose show subtitle or live transcript to see those captions. You can also choose hide subtitle if they're distracting to you. And then I'm going to share my screen with you for just one more announcement. And that is that we are hoping and praying and planning that someday, not too far off, possibly September, we will be back together in our building, at least some of us. We're going to continue having the option of virtual worship for a long time. And when we come back together, we're going to need volunteers. Some of these are jobs that we've had for a long time, like ushers and greeters, worship associates, and lay preachers. If you have already done those jobs and you want to keep doing them, but you feel like you need a little refresher, reach out to me. We'll do a little refresher and some new understanding about what that will look like with new restrictions about how we be together. We also need some tech helpers to help support having a virtual service going on during our live service, live streaming what we do in person. And it's a pretty low tech job. Even don't let the word tech scare you away from being a tech helper. If you can click a couple buttons, you can probably be a tech helper. And we can figure that all out together. If you're interested, let me know, reach out to me by email or phone, and we will get you trained and feeling confident before that beautiful day when we get to join together in our building. And with that, let's take a deep breath in together and let us enter a space of worship. Let's light our chalices together. If you have a chalice or a candle nearby, I invite you to light it at this time as we say our chalice lighting words. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, and celebration of the life we share together. So I want to tell you a story. I used to work for the Episcopal Diocese of Rochester, consulting their 50-odd churches on community outreach and growth, among other things. And there's a sign that you tend to see outside an Episcopal church almost always. Maybe you can visualize that sign. It's got their sort of shield symbol on it. That you've seen outside Episcopal churches, and it reads, "The Episcopal Church welcomes you." And often when I visited a church to consult and I asked the church about their vision, about their mission, their unique reason for existing and serving their community, the church leaders would tell me, well, we're welcoming. Radical welcome, that's us, that's who we are. And I would thoroughly annoy them by insisting that they explain to what they wanted to welcome people. We welcome you to what? Because, hey, I'm welcome at any restaurant in town, but it matters to me what they're serving. I want to know what's on the menu. not just that I have a seat at the table. Welcome itself is not a mission statement. And now I don't tell this story to highlight how silly Episcopalians are and how much better we are. I tell it, maybe you've guessed, because I think it applies to us sometimes too. We welcome everyone, but so does brunch, so does sleeping in, so do any number of activities folks might choose to spend their Sundays doing. Hell, so do the Episcopalians over at St. John's on Main Street. They've even got a sign saying so. But I believe, even if we need practice articulating it, that we welcome people to something of substance here. We come to church because we are doing work in our community and our world that is at least as important as brunch most days. We are holding one another's joys and sorrows in ways that sleeping in usually just doesn't compare with. And we are digging deep to find meaning in the midst of chaos. So if you're here this morning, you are indeed welcome. And that's only the beginning. Let's sing together our first hymn, Where is Our Holy Church? And now it is time for a story. This morning's story is one that maybe you've heard before. It's a story about the blind men and the elephant. And the story goes like this. There were blind men walking together through a forest, and they came upon a mysterious sound. They heard something up ahead. Now we know it was an elephant because of the title of the story, of course, but they weren't sure what it was. They heard some crunching up ahead, and they heard a swishing noise. And so they decided to investigate. The first man went forward and he felt the trunk of the elephant. And he said, it's long and firm and circular. And I think it might be a snake. It's something like a snake. And then he stepped back, and the second man walked forward, and he felt the ear of the elephant. And he said, no, it's soft and thin and fluid like, and I think it might be like a curtain. And he stepped back, and then the third man stepped forward, and he felt the body of the elephant. And he said, No, it's so vast and broad and rough, but a little smooth too. And I think it's some kind of wall. It's a wall that we've come upon. Then he stepped back, and the fourth man finally stepped forward, and he felt the tail of the elephant. And he said, it's thin and long, and it's got some sort of threads at the bottom of it. And I'm sure that what we found is a rope. And he stepped back, and what we know, because we know it's an elephant because of the title of the story, is that all of them were right, and yet none of them were right. They were all wrong about what it was, and yet they weren't wrong about what they experienced. And I think sometimes church can be like that. Church can be an elephant that we feel blindly. And we all feel something a little different, and our experience is right. But we're never fully right, each of us alone, about what it is we've encountered here. And that is the end of our story. And now it is time to share in our joys and our sorrows together. This is a community where we hold one another in our celebrations and in our pain. And we know that whatever it is we hold in our hearts this morning, we are with one another in holding it. So I ask you to use the chat feature here on Zoom to share with us, what are the deepest feelings on your heart today? Are there joys or sorrows to lift up this morning? There are so many things we hold in our hearts today. This morning, we hold joy for all the signs of spring, the red trilliums, tomato seedlings going into the greenhouse, walks outside, a nesting mallard, joy for the sun. We are celebrating with Karen as she turns 50. We grieve for my dear friend, Will Hayes, a staff member at First Unitarian. We are celebrating all of the new and new again visits that vaccination allows us to have with moms and grandmas and friends. And we hold some tenderness for the loneliness that still sits with us when we are alone. We are so glad to have time with family, and we are hopeful for the future. Let us hold these and all the things in the silence of our hearts together and know that we are with one another. And I invite you now into the spiritual practice of generosity. As we take our offering this morning, I remind us of the covenant, of the promise we make to one another in this community. We promise in the service of the values that unite us that we will recognize the inherent value in each person, foster a community of compassion and caring for all, value our diverse opinions, and engage respectfully in all interactions. Your donations are the way that we uphold this promise. They fund the good work that we do together. And we share a quarter of our monthly offering with a service partner each month. This month's service partner is the Rochester chapter of the Sunrise Movement, a youth movement to stop climate change. You can give to this morning's offering in a variety of ways. You could give by visiting our website, which is available in the chat, or by mailing a check to the church at 3024 Cooley Road in Canandaigua. You could give by setting up an automatic recurring gift through your bank. And in any of those cases, we ask you to make a note that you would like your gift to be included in this morning's plate collection offering so that we're able to share a quarter of it with our service partner. We thank you for your generosity today. Now is the time in our service for centering and shared silence. So I invite you to get comfortable where you sit, to let some part of you feel supported and firm and strong, to let some part of you feel soft. Perhaps your shoulders fall away from your ears and your breath slows down. I'd like to share a picture with you before we begin our meditation today, not because it's a lovely picture, but because we need to see it. These are militarized police in Brooklyn Center outside Minneapolis, some 5 rows strong surrounding the Lutheran church there, because the Lutheran church there has every night this week opened their doors to provide shelter and medical care to protesters who are grieving the loss of Black lives in Minneapolis and around the country. So in our meditation this morning, my prayer is that we know ourselves. We know our mission and our purpose in this world, as well as the Lutheran Church in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. This morning's words for meditation are by Teresa Soto. In this community, we hold hope close. We don't always know what comes next, but that cannot dissuade us. We don't always know just what to do, but that will not mean that we are lost in the wilderness. We rely on the certainty beneath, the foundation of our values and ethics. We are the people who return to love like a North Star and to the truth that we are greater together than we are alone. Our hope does not live in some glimmer of an indistinct future. Rather, we know the way to the world of which we dream. And by covenant and the movement forward of one right action and the next, we know that one day we will arrive at home.
Spirit of light, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the streams of compassion. Blowing the wind, rising from the sea. Moving on, giving life the shape of justice. Moved upon me, Lord, wind set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
When I was training to be a chaplain in a hospital, my supervisor invited us to use a few very simple principles when we were supporting someone experiencing the trauma of change or loss. The first I shared with you near the beginning of the pandemic. Let the heart have its day. That was the first step. There is no good response to change or loss that serves to shut down or cut short the full experience of the heart. And now that we're nearing positively, possibly, tentatively, hopefully, the end of the pandemic, I want to share the second principle. When you lose your footing, he'd say, dig for bedrock. What he meant was that when change makes it feel like the sands are shifting beneath your feet, like everything has been washed away and the world you built is falling apart, dig deep for what was the foundation of it all. Dig for spiritual solid ground. Because trauma or loss can make us question everything we thought we knew. A worldwide trauma, like a global pandemic, a trauma that has called us or forced us to live without so much of what we thought was necessary, maybe has us wondering what matters at all. I saw this in hospital chaplaincy every day, too. Nothing is a better test of what matters to you than a fatal diagnosis, the loss of limb or mobility or independence. The loss of a person you built everything with will make you feel like there is nothing lasting in this world. And if that's the case, like nothing we do matters. If everything can fall apart in a moment, what does matter? Where can we stand and feel like we're on solid ground? As vaccines and masks allow us to think of stepping out into this new world, it might be time to dig deep. As Unitarian Universalists, where is our solid spiritual ground? Because let's not kid ourselves, sometimes we bury it pretty deep, right? It can be easy, far too easy, to think of our faith like an empty sack. Y'all come and just bring whatever you carry. Every belief fits, everyone is welcome. But that's not the case. Sure, everyone is welcome, but every behavior is not. And I don't think I'll hear any argument from you on that. Everyone is welcome, but no, not every belief. Is, for example, belief in a God who prefers certain sexualities or genders or races over others a Unitarian Universalist belief? No. Is the belief that some of us will be damned to hell for eternity while others rejoice in a paradise a Unitarian Universalist belief? It sure is not. Is the belief that what happens to the earth doesn't matter because earth is temporary a Unitarian Universalist belief? Hell no. There are boundaries. There is a shape to our faith. It fits a great many things, but it is not an empty sack that fits anything. And there's substance there. It isn't empty. I know you're muted, but I can see some of your faces. And I'm going to assume that what I saw was a good few of you shouting out, hell no, along with me to that last question. And so we know there's a there to our faith, even when it's hard to articulate because we're a little out of practice. We have no creed, but that does not mean we have no substance. It is not an empty faith, a holy book with blank pages. And especially in the midst of a year of such loss, we need to teach ourselves how to dig for what's there, to dig through the shifting sands to the bedrock that holds us. James Luther Adams was a Unitarian minister and a theologian who wrestled with the question of the foundations of our faith. And his wrestling, I think, is a good place for us to start digging. An X marks the spot on a map, perhaps. Reverend Adams wrote about what he called the 5 smooth stones of liberal religion. This was in reaction to what were called the 5 rough stones of Christianity, which was a reference to 5 stones thrown by David at Goliath in the Bible. And like, that's a whole thing we're not going to get into today. Adams' smooth stones were: first, religious liberalism depends on the principle that revelation is continuous, he said. He meant that our religious tradition is a living tradition because we are always learning new truths. There is not, in Unitarian Universalism, the idea that our spiritual wisdom is limited to a certain source, and that source has been fully revealed and understood. We learned in Adam's lifetime what the original Hebrew of the Jewish Bible said, and we learned what the inside of an atom looks like. And those are revelations that change us spiritually. Second, he said, all relations between persons ought ideally to rest on mutual free consent and not coercion. It's foundational to our faith that we freely choose to enter into relationship with one another. There is no punishment, community, or divine for those who choose not to be part of this church. There is no shunning when people leave. Our congregations are not obligated to a higher authority than their people. They join in association freely. Third, religious liberalism affirms the moral obligation to direct one's effort toward the establishment of a just and loving community. Ours is a faith that demands we work toward justice, he means. It does not allow for beliefs that encourage us to ignore the marginalized or deepen disconnections between people. The effects of our beliefs on our actions and the effects of our actions on the world matter. Fourth, he said, we deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. This smooth stone is about agency. Good things don't just happen, people make them happen, Adams is saying. Our beliefs require human agency to be part of social progress or liberation. There may or may not be a God in our personal beliefs, but there is not one who works alone to move the world toward justice. Human work is required. Finally, Adams wrote, liberalism holds that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. We believe in hope. There is no irrevocably fallen world for us. We may or may not see the restoration of every broken promise or reparation of every harm, but the belief that repair and healing are possible is foundational for us. I think Adam's smooth stones are still relevant for us as Unitarian Universalists searching for solid ground, but they can feel a little dated, a little too embedded in the white male humanist theology of his time period. So I want to offer this modernized version of what Unitarian Universalists do and do not believe by modern theologian Rebecca Parker as well. She wrote about the substance of Unitarian Universalism by pointing to what doesn't fit in 4 points, which I'll paraphrase for her. First, she said, we can have different ideas about God or believe in no God, but we don't believe in a version of God that undermines the exercise of human freedom. Second, we can understand salvation, liberation, healing in so many different ways, but we don't believe in any kind of ultimate liberation that includes some and excludes others. Third, she said we can have a variety of different spiritual practices, but we don't believe there's any single one way to the truth, including our own way. And finally, Parker wrote that we can believe different things about the nature of the world, but we reject beliefs that treat the world like anything other than a sacred place in the here and now. The world matters. This world matters. Both Parker's and Adams' words are the beginning of the search. They're the treasure map to get us started digging, the X in the sand. But the dig is our own work. It's our work as individuals and as a church community to pull aside everything that will not stand, everything that will not endure the tidal waves of change and loss and growth and time, and find what bedrock lies beneath. Because change and loss and growth and time will come. They will wash away all that we have built around ourselves eventually. Sometimes in a slow and gentle, steady, lifelong ebb and flow. Sometimes in a flood that levels everything around us. All our defenses, all our plans, our imagined future, and the safety we felt in it. Every cathedral within us built by our ego will fall. And what is the ground beneath it all? When the wife of 60 years becomes a widow, when the marathon runner is confined to a bed, when the church cannot gather around a common table, who are we underneath all that? When what we have built all falls away, what firm foundation do we stand upon? One last theologian, I promise. The theologian Karl Barth was possibly one of the most prolific and influential Christian theologians of all time. His writings on doctrine literally take up bookshelves. He wrote a library. He built vast frameworks for understanding God and the universe and our place in it. And still, at the end of his life, the story goes, a beloved student asked him what he really knew for certain. What was his firmest and most steady belief? And he said, the story goes, after all this time, the only thing I really believe is what I learned at my mother's knee. Jesus loves me, this I know. That was it. His mountains of writing, his decades of work could wash away, will literally crumble away someday. And he knew one thing at the root of it all. He was loved. This is the kind of thing I'm asking us to dig for. Not to create a pile of large and complicated words, not to look at the sandy mound of theological analysis we dig up on the side, because that won't matter in the storm, but to look down at the spiritual bedrock beneath it. What is the one thing you will know for certain when the rest washes away? What is the truth that will hold us firm? We have from Adams and Parker a great understanding of what we are not. You know all of the things that we Unitarian Universalists say we don't do, that we object to. We don't believe all the same things about God, about human nature, about healing and wholeness. We don't have a common creed. We don't look to church authority for doctrine to believe about the unknown or the unknowable. We don't have a list of beliefs that all of us pledge to in order to belong. You might even explain Unitarian Universalism to your friends with these descriptions. I know I have. But there is a substance there. This is not an empty sack. Because here's the thing, I don't think any of us comes to church because of who we're not. The things we decidedly know not to be true will not carry us through the storm of loss and change and time. The knots of our faith only point us to the X on the ground. They get us started digging in the right place, but dig we must. For Barth, the bedrock of faith was the promise of divine love. For Unitarian Universalists, I think it is belonging. Belonging to our deeper selves, to one another, to the web of life, to hope in a world that could someday be shaped by our belonging to it and to each other. We recite the knots. We reject all those restrictions on belief because for us, the much deeper ground of our understanding is belonging. So anything that cuts us off from belonging must wash away. The truly lasting bedrock of our faith doesn't live in books or sermons or some heavenly other realm. It lives in our bodies. It lives in the earth, in the actual bedrock. I don't think we can separate any theology, however loftily we compose it, from the particular bit of earth that made us. A few years ago, I took a drive with my child in the back seat, and I remember this moment so frequently. We drove toward the Green Mountains, which is where I was raised. And as we came close, I looked out the window and saw them in the distance and felt my heart sigh, the way our hearts do when they glimpse the core of their own depths. My very bones knew they were on steady ground. Look, I said to him, those are my mountains. They belong to me. And I paused, dug deeper toward what I knew in my bones. Actually, I said, I belong to them. I have not learned in ministry, in books, in seminary, in 1,000 Sundays in a pew, how to sum up belief any better than this. I belong to the body of the earth, to that which made me. All of us do, which must mean, I hope, that we belong to one another. May it be so. Amen.
From the time that you set foot upon this earth to pass your days, you are walking on borrowed ground, and you may stake no claims to the soil and to the water, to the creatures lying by. Even the breath you take is low from on high. It all comes down in the end. All the works of your hand, though built of stone and honestly, no earthly house shall ever stand. It comes down in the end, like a handful of sand, and it all comes down in the end. As you walk along these borders with the deed held in your hand, just remember you don't own this. You are a steward of this land. So seek wisdom and show mercy, leaving some for another day, where you will call upon yourself the same someday. It all comes down in the end. All the words of your hand, though built of stone and honestly, no earthly house shall ever stand. It comes down in the end, like a handful of sand, and it all comes down in the end. You drift down like a leaf to find your final resting place. You will return what you have borrowed. You will have to show your face. Did you help some troubled soul? Did you try to lend a hand? For only kindness in the end alone shall stand. It all comes down in the end. All the words of your hand, though built on stone and honestly, no earthly house shall ever stand. It comes down in the end, like a handful of sand, and it all comes down in the end. It all comes down in the end. Words of your hand, though built on stone and honestly, no earthly house shall ever stand. It comes down in the end, like a handful of sand, and it all comes down in the end.
These things we know for sure. Love forms us at the beginning. Love holds us at the end. And all the love in the middle is up to us. Let's sing our closing hymn together. My life flows on in endless song. Let's extinguish our chalices together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment, those we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you for being together this morning.